order.
Good.
And I see that it's recording. So I want to say hello and introduce myself. I'm Heidi Burgess with Beyond Intractability, and I'm talking today with Grande Lum for the second of what will probably be 3 or 4 interviews about his experience as the director of the Community Relations Service, which was a position he held from 2012 to 2016. And we've also talked quite a bit about what he did beforehand. And we'll probably at the end talk a bit about what he did afterwards. But right now we're in the middle of our discussion of CRS. And I went back over our last discussion and saw that we were kind of all over the place. So I had a hard time figuring out what we covered and what we hadn't. But my note said that we should start talking about how you manage to maintain calm or some semblance of control in very overheated public meetings when there were lots of angry people there saying lots of angry things. We were talking a lot last time about Ferguson and about the meeting that you set up with Eric Holder, which I gather was more in control than it might have been, because maybe people were under better behavior because Holder was there. But my notes did say that I should ask you about how to deal with these really hot meetings.
That's a terrific place to start, Heidi. In that meeting with Attorney General Holder, people, I think, were very respectful, but they had a lot going on. I mean, there was a lot of pain, a lot of concern. I think what was terrific was that people felt listened to, to have the Attorney General listening to you, I think provided some comfort. And certainly, I think I talked about it last time. Overall, running those events, meeting with people and showing the presence of the federal government and all that CRS and other agencies, including the Civil Rights Division, including the Community-Oriented Policing Office, the COPS office, being there, showed that the federal government was taking action and also listening in that regard. So I don't know. So there was that meeting. I mean, I think it, and I can think of various meetings, whether it was me facilitating or other conciliators. It is quite often important to run these meetings here. I certainly can recall sessions in Baltimore after Freddie Gray, and there were meetings where I was either facilitating or involved in, or others were running. And I certainly recall that in Baltimore, and being with the then Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, being with a number of community leaders. I remember being with a lot of Black pastors, Black faith leaders who were also involved and were trying to bring peace to a situation there. I do think it's important to really make sure, I think this is not my term, the forum fits the fuss.
Yeah.
Was that Frank Sander, I think, who said that?
I don't remember who said that.
I forget. I think it was here. And what is thinking through what the goal is here. And therefore, given the purpose of the meeting, who should be at the meeting, right? Who should be there? And what is the end goal? What is it that you want to have achieved by the end of that meeting? What's the deliverable, or what's the tangible? Is it a list of ideas? Is it an agreement? Is it next steps? I think all of those things help in dealing with potentially highly volatile situations here. If people want to vent, how do we create a situation where they can do it in a way that's constructive? Is it, I know sometimes we'll run groups where we will have several facilitators and you'll break them into small groups. And that has a way of not being the same as 200 people
Right,
and one person versus breaking them into small groups of 10 and having a set of questions. And I think that can work beautifully at times where people do feel heard. There certainly was a benefit to having a Department of Justice official there. We would have to very much explain, of course, and explain multiple times at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, at times that, at least for the Community Relations Service, our job is not prosecution. Our job is not litigation. Our job is not investigation. That this is meant as a voluntary service to help people listen to each other, understand each other, facilitate problem solving and questions. So, and you have to be very careful. And I can certainly remember situations in Baltimore where a reporter might share with us, a storekeeper says that you all have a plan to prevent further violence, and and when that store gets broken into, that person gets really upset. Well, somebody at Department of Justice told you had a plan. I think he misheard what the conciliator said. It's like, we would like to work with you to help create a plan or something like that, versus saying we have and so that is it is very important. I think, especially you're walking a line where you are a federal employee, where you are a Department of Justice official. So we have to take that into account, which may be a little different from a mediator, a community center mediator, or someone who's a private mediator. There is a way in which we have to be very careful about what we do, because everything will make the Department of Justice, will make them look bad if something doesn't go right, if there is shouting and anger or if a fight breaks out. So we have to keep that in account. We can't have things like that as much as we can doing so. I would say the conciliators, they would just be very skilled. I think they would be, they really understood those sort of constraints, and they would often figure out ways of having, of course, you know these, Heidi, of having ground rules, of having skilled facilitators for if it was that sort of conversation, a town hall type situation that you would have there. So it takes, of course, just a lot of preparation to figure this out. It is thinking through worst case scenarios. It is thinking through how do we prevent those issues. And sometimes I think there sometimes has to be a decision to say, well, if the risk outweigh the benefits, or if the possibility of something bad, you've got to think through how do we either adjust for that, or say, maybe we should, this is not, it's a timing. I think for so much of the work of conciliators, mediators, a lot of it is also thinking through the timing, right? We think through the goal of the work, and we think through like who should be there. I think one thing I think we in CRS, I think people think very diligently about is the timing of an intervention here, and understanding, I think, really the pitfalls or potential bad scenarios that could happen.
Let's talk a little bit more about the timing issue. In conflict resolution, we talk about ripeness, and a conflict will be ripe for negotiation or not. Do you think in terms of, do you have a checklist or something that's like that, but more informal, where you figure out that this is an appropriate time to bring people together to try to develop a plan of how to move forward, or it's too hot, everybody's too angry, we just got to throw some water on the fire, and then maybe in a week or a month we can bring people together.
Yeah, I think you capture a lot of what we asked the conciliators to do. Again, there's a level of management, the regional directors, who provide a lot of guidance to the individual conciliators, and you're certainly aware of that from the previous set of interviews when you did them a number of years ago here. That's absolutely the case, right? When something is when there's just a lot of anger and hostility and emotion, your goals are different, and it may not be time for a town hall. It may be time to do the interviews and diagnostics and spend time understanding and assessing the situation. And even that, of course, has a benefit of really helping people, of listening to people, of even helping them reframe. It's similar to coaching. And again, I think many of our conciliators had relationships with the community leaders, the civil rights leaders, the civic leaders, law enforcement, city officials as well. And that was an important role, and something I think a number of our folks provide is technical assistance. That's, I think, partly government speak for providing advice or consulting. And you'd have a lot of conciliators who had seen these situations before and who could then provide a thoughtful strategy, some plans and some options for folks to consider here. It was certainly true in places like Sanford, whether it was Thomas Battles and Mildred Dupre de Robles doing it there. I can certainly, I certainly think that's a part of it, because you're right. If it's heated, all you're looking for is a little détente. All you're looking for is cooling down.
Right.
And so there are tools, I think, that CRS conciliators utilize. A lot of it was like self-marshaling, right? Because if there were being protests going on, I think a wonderful support that CRS conciliators provided was, how do you help the protesters stay safe? How do you help prevent possibilities of violence happening? And how do you allow them and enable them to exercise their First Amendment right of free speech? And then there are other times where other tools made sense, like training, right? Hate crimes training. Let's help the community understand what is a hate crime, which is not always so obvious, and it's frustrating to people if they don't see the Department of Justice prosecuting someone right away for something, and helping them understand the length of investigation, and that the standard, at least in the time that I was at CRS, was a fairly high standard to prosecute someone for a hate crime, for example. So there's that sort of training that can be provided as well. And when was mediation appropriate? Where if there was the ability, when things were calmer, maybe that was a time where you could engage local residents and community with law enforcement, with city officials, to look at police policies, to be able to create a community task force, or some sort of or creating a police review board of some sort for a community in that type of situation here. If it was a hate crime issue, how to help residents feel safer, if that was the concern in a situation, and what support mechanisms could a city provide, or a state entity or a federal entity might provide to help community members feel safer as well. So I think that's absolutely the case, that that the CRS conciliator really had to think about rightness quite a bit. And there are times when are people willing to engage, and
Right.
who's willing to come to the meetings, right? And sometimes you don't, if something else if it's too long, you may not have the buy-in or engagement, that you have the attention of the mayor, you have the attention and the buy-in of certain key leaders. You've got to figure out, oh yeah, now's the time where they'll come to the table. This is the time to have some sort of intervention here as well.
Great. So the other thing that I had in my notes was that you pointed out that lots of the work that CRS does are not these high profile cases. They're more normal cases, whatever that means. And I'm wondering whether you ever went on the ground for those, or whether those were the things where you stayed back in Washington and let your conciliators and regional directors handle them.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good question. For the most part, yeah, when I would go in on the ground was when it was often a bigger conflict where my presence was useful for whatever purpose. So that there were times when bringing in a high level government official would be helpful to breaking a logjam, and was often in the higher profile situations. That isn't to say, I think what I could do to support that type of work, the work where it was there was less emotion, there was less adversarialism, was, I think, really thinking through what training to provide. Like we really want to emphasize more mediation work at a certain point, where we were focused on whether it's working with a city on discrimination issues, or on police violence, or on hate crimes. What sort of programs could we create that the conciliators could then utilize in a situation? What training would they need to better mediate? What professional development could we bring in? And how do we improve our processes to make it easier for them to do this work? So I spent a lot of time focused on that, and we also said, okay, let's better codify how we do the assessment of a situation, how you as conciliators make the choice between providing facilitation of a conversation or dialogue, technical assistance or consulting, training. What type of trainings, what tools would you provide, and when would you do mediation, right? And helping folks think more clearly and have more organized thinking about it, and providing them with training and helping them try to make it as easy as possible, honestly, for them to be able to capture this in what they're doing, I think made a difference as well. And a lot of it is also, I think, helping them relationship build, especially for newer conciliators. The ability to do that kind of work, especially when it's a little calmer, it was true. I think it was true for some of the more junior conciliators. You've got to be able to engage comfortably and have credibility with some fairly high level people, with mayors, with civil rights leaders, with protest groups who may not want to give you the time of day because they think of you as a Fed,
right.
For example, and civic leaders, and also certainly the people, and also figuring out who are people who have influence that aren't so obvious, but are often within most communities. I think that was often something, who had their ear to the ground, who really knew the players in situation, or people who should actually come to the table, or who should be talked to, who could persuade a community here, or who could persuade some of the leaders within stakeholders within any given community as well. So I think that was important as a way of supporting their ability to doing that as well. And also it was, especially we referred to it last time about the fact that we had all these new jurisdictions where not necessarily all our conciliators were well versed in all these new labels. It was also bringing in experts to work with them on to train them, but also they needed to have those resources to provide to communities. Well, here's who you should talk to, or why don't we bring in this expert who can help us think about gender identity issues or the type of issues that were involved. I think it also helped that we would work with different groups if it was around mental health issues, around religious issues, that if we had national relationships at the headquarter level, it would also help with them having relationships at the local or regional affiliate levels with the ADLs, of course, with the NAACP, and all the different, La Alianza and all the different groups that you would work with in religious, racial, gender-based organizations as well.
I'm really struck listening to you. You're the only director that we've talked to. And I'm listening to you all about different ways that you tried to support the regional directors and the conciliators. And it really strikes me as interesting and different from some of the stories that we heard long ago, way before you were in your position, of tensions between the director and the regional directors and the conciliators. And then I just talked 2 days ago with P. Diane Schneider, who was talking a lot about the outreach that she liked to do, very much similar to what you just said about trying to figure out who's the real knowledgeable people in the community. And I was asking her about entry and building trust and all that. And she said, well, you have to back up, that you need to do all this groundwork before something happens. But then she said that on towards the end of her career, she wasn't supposed to do that kind of work anymore because that was considered by Washington to be a waste of time, which I found to be very, A, surprising, but B, consistent with what we heard before when people would complain that Washington has all these rules and just all sorts of people telling us about all the ways that they work around what they thought was a rule coming down from Washington. And I'm hearing you talking much more collaboratively. Do you have any sense that you were more collaborative with your regional directors and conciliators than was common at the agency?
I feel like this is a dangerous question for me to answer at some level, but I don't know. I can only honestly speak from my own experience here, and that isn't to say there are a lot of rules and policies that in Washington, the headquarters, my office was responsible for implementing and enforcing. I think, there's a lot of HR rules. There are a lot of things that we use to measure success here, because yes, we, as at the headquarters office in Washington, D.C., we were responsible to share internally with different Department of Justice groups, whether it's the Attorney General, whether it's the Associate Attorney General, Deputy, or to them, the proof or evidence that we were doing something
Right.
positive and constructive. And yes, I mean, we were clearly asking for measurement. How many mediations did you do, right? How many people attended your trainings? What were the outcomes? And it was clear part of the job is asking them to document this. And I can see how, if I were in their shoes, sometimes it might feel like this is getting in the way of the work, especially if we're introducing a new program by which you need to do this. And because we're trying to enhance the program, it was always with the goal of trying to help them be more successful with the conciliators, making it hopefully easier for them to do the paperwork, to do this, and also to demonstrate the great work that they were doing. But I think, again, these are career folks who have gone through probably many leadership changes, whether the political appointee like myself or other changes within the department. Some of the changes might have been required by Department of Justice overall and not by the CRS director. And our job in a large organization is to implement whatever requirements when you turn in your expenses, right? How to get permission to go do something, or what's the policy about speaking to the media, or how to engage in a situation. Those are things that, it was, and that was not always a fun thing to do from DC or from headquarters. But in order to be successful, in order to not run afoul and make it, and therefore would make it more difficult to do the work. Sure, I'm sure we implemented policies that were not always popular, but my goal was always, what can we do? I mean, I think that should be the job of any person as an administrator, to how do you make it easier for people to do the work, right? What is the ultimate outcome we're trying to achieve here? And what can you do to make it easier? What can you do to support them to doing it? And I think, I'm appreciative of what I could do on that end, and try to just acknowledge that there are realities that we all have to fill out, take a lot of different required trainings in order to be a federal employee. And there are a lot of forms to fill out when you transfer, when you start, when you want to get promoted. These are all things that were not, certainly not unique to my time. And I can empathize with other directors too, who had to do the similar things to what I had to do. But I certainly tried my best. And in terms of honoring them, because they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones who are out there ultimately, for the most part, doing the important work, and doing work that's often unrecognized, right? That these are people who are behind the scenes, who are often who don't get the credit that I think they richly deserve, which is why I'm glad that you did the oral history project. I'm glad that I wrote a second edition to a book to further acknowledge and recognize the amazing work that many of these conciliators and regional directors did.
And one of the things that I think I remember reading in the book, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember it, is that either you or other director brought in regional directors and conciliators to make some of these national policies. So you weren't just acting from above and dictating to down below, but consistent with the rest of what CRS does. It was a collaborative process. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, and as much as we could, I want to lean on the regional directors and conciliators for policies that they would be more comfortable with,
right,
in terms of professional development, in terms of how we did the work. I was very happy to have brought in a conciliator to become director of training, Kit Chalberg, who was a very, very, I think a very smart conciliator, one who really saw the big picture and understood how important professional development was for the agency as a whole. And I think he did tremendous work in terms of thinking about, well, what training is needed for our conciliators to be successful here. So yeah, I think as much as I could, I tried to bring in the regional directors and conciliators to help form policies, to help form approaches, to help us create new products. And by products, I mean doing work on. We did work on transgender issues. I think I mentioned earlier. We did them on cognitive disability issues. We had a lot to do because the Matthew Shepard, James Burt Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was quite new, and I relied upon the folks and how to handle it. And I remember how it was staff who said, "Oh yeah, you've really got to give space to folks who are in the transgender groups to first be prepared and brainstorm before bringing them together with police chiefs and others, because that there are some concerns and trepidations that folks have, and thinking through the process as a good mediator or good facilitator should, to making sure people feel safe in any meeting.
Right. Let me pause for just a minute. I'm going to run and go close the door because the wind is getting too noisy, and I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
So I'm interested in your talking about training. When we did our first round of interviews 25 years ago, and we were talking about people who were there, talking with people who were with CRS right at the beginning, right near 64, 65, there wasn't any training. Everybody was talking about seat of the pantsing it.
Yeah.
CRS has been around a lot longer. Everybody has learned a lot more. The field was brand new at the time. How much training do people get now?
I don't know today. I mean, I do know I've been invited to a couple of sessions, and they had some really good professional development there. They've brought in professors who are very knowledgeable about race relations issues. For example, they've certainly in the annual all staff meetings, I think throughout my time, and I think certainly since then, they'll spend time providing professional development and training for folks. I think the challenge is consistency and sustainability, because people change positions, people come and go, but they've brought in some wonderful training throughout. I mean, how I first learned about CRS was because my organization at the time, Conflict Management Inc. and Conflict Management Group, two organizations started by Roger Fisher and Bruce Patton, we were engaged to provide training to CRS. So that was the first time I even had learned about CRS. And I didn't personally provide the training, but my colleagues did. So I was like, wow, this is an amazing organization. Roger Fisher was invited, I think in the late 60s, over to talk with folks. I know Christopher Moore has been engaged, and his organization has been engaged as well by Kit Chalberg, who I think who knew them well. So yeah, I think they've done a good job. Again, I think the challenges are budget. The challenges are succession planning, and I'm sure that it can always. How would I frame this? I think they've recognized the importance of it and have worked hard at it. What I think a big difference, as opposed to times when you did the earlier interviews, is a lot of folks come in now with conflict resolution training. Folks have gotten masters at George Mason at what was then the School of Conflict and Resolution.
Analysis and resolution.
And now, conflict analysis and resolution. So there are people who actually have degrees, people who've gone to law school and have taken conflict resolution, negotiation training. Have went to your programs at University of Colorado and gotten training as well. So I think that's a big difference, that more people have come into CRS with some background in civil rights, race relations, conflict management, mediation, conflict analysis, and I think that has helped quite a bit as well. And people have also come in with whatever backgrounds they have. And I think it has been very useful to have people who have had civil rights background and human relations commissions background, a law enforcement or a military background, and the training that comes with that. And of course, I think the benefit is often those in that type of training, more have received conflict negotiation type training as well. And I think you can see that in the ability and the importance of listening, in the importance of active listening, the importance of how to manage a difficult conversation as well.
So what I'm hearing is that the current cohort has a lot more academic formal training in the field, whereas in the beginning, everybody, including me, were kind of inventing it as we went along.
Sure.
Looking at all of the cases that you studied when you were working on the book, and that you were involved with when you were there, do you think that all of the academic background and the training has led to better results? Or do you think, I'm giving you another hot potato again?
I don't know. I think the academic training will only work if they've had practical experience in combination with it.
Totally agree.
Because of the type of work that CRS is involved with. And those who are newer, I think, but had an academic training sometimes struggle, I think. If they were newer in their careers, I think for those who had a lot of experience on top of the more academic training were the ones who could then make the connections here, because I think you need to bring some sort, the hard part about CRS is I think you do need to bring some sort of skill set to the table and then grow from there. Whether you had, I think if you were in the civil rights, you understood advocacy, you understood the community groups, you had that sort of experience of understanding advocacy. If you came from the law enforcement side, you would have an understanding of how law enforcement interacts with this. So I would say that made a difference here. And I'd point to Sanford in the Trayvon Martin situation, where I think a significant number of players had a dispute resolution background combined with lots of experience, which makes a difference. Thomas Battles, of course, being the prime example of someone who had some training while he was getting his degrees, but clearly learned from Ozell Sutton and had a lot of experience. And before that, I would also then go to Andrew Thomas, who had run the Rochester Community Mediation Center for years and years before then coming to Sanford and happened to work for Sanford, the city government, when this all comes down, and utilizes all that skill and all that knowledge to help the community navigate the protesters, the law enforcement, and all of that, and understand how do we create more consensus? How do we engage these protesters and brings a lifetime of experience
Right.
as a dispute resolution professional with training, with some background to it. The fact that Norton Bonaparte was a city manager who had also received negotiation training and had experience working with CRS in other places. And by the way, Andrew Thomas did too. He had experience working with CRS when he was at Rochester. All those things, I think, help.
All came together.
All those things come together to help bring whatever the skill set of conflict resolution, conflict management, combined with lots of life experience in difficult conflicts, and who then all work together in a situation from their different vantage points. And there are many more players. I mean, this is just a few of the players who did have conflict resolution background, who then play a significant role in understanding protests, in understanding how do we help use that energy toward problem solving. And many of these players have been involved in Sanford for 10 years, and they're still there. And then Norton Bonaparte is still the city manager. They've had a police chief who's been there for quite a bit of time. You know, Andrew Thomas has continually worked for Sanford throughout those years as well. So you can see how you know, it's important. And I haven't talked about the mayor at the time who's now passed. The mayor did not have this sort of conflict resolution experience, but he was open to the use of it. And because he was open to it and saw the benefit of it, he was a big advocate of CRS throughout, and he saw the benefit of like Thomas had recommended to the mayor, to the then mayor, that he should speak at one of these rallies here. Initially, he gets booed, but because the congresswoman says, no, this person is the person who brought in the Civil Rights Department, he then gets cheered, and then it really does change. You can compare that to other situations where the mayor becomes this sort of hated figure, and in this situation, the mayor is seen as part of the solution. Wow. Here, right? Versus and so I think there are numerous examples within Sanford of where the combination of, I think, of life experience, work experience, combined with conflict resolution background contributes tremendously.
And what I'm also hearing in that story is that all these folks knew each other beforehand, had relationships with each other. So if you've got a relationship with somebody from before, you trust them, you know that they're well-meaning, capable people, that's going to give you a leg up too, than if you're dealing with strangers where you almost always come in being distrusted.
It goes to Diane Snyder's, I think, point of building relationships to be prepared for the conflict later. I would add to that what was true here was for Norton and for Andrew, they had worked with different CRS people in their previous experiences. So the organization, the fact that they had a positive experience with somebody at CRS in a different setting allowed them to, I think, have trust in different CRS personnel when they were in this new city as well.
Great. Well, it certainly helps that CRS develops a known reputation, and the fact that you're supposed to fly under the radar as much as you do is problematic, and I can see where it's helpful. You said in our last interview, I think, that you were one of the people who tried to raise the profile of it somewhat so that people trusted it more and you got funding for it. And certainly has value.
Absolutely. And, you know, since I've departed CRS, I am now not operating under some of those, strictures. I'm no longer part of the federal government. I think the work of those who used to work at CRS can then be good advocates for it as well. And I think it has made a difference that a number of us, and I've worked with Grace Flores Hughes, who was a director earlier, who was Republican, and we wrote a joint article supporting CRS, and I think those things are important to do. And I was very appreciative of Grace for doing that.
Where was that article published?
It was on, I think we did it on The Hill. It was a Washington, D.C. newsletter, and on medium.com
Okay.
as well. So, and I've written one with the daughter of the first director, Leroy Collins, as well, Darby Collins. We wrote articles together. So, and there are, and many others I think have been very supportive, like Becky Monroe, who was an acting director. She wasn't an appointed director, but she's done quite a bit in support of CRS in articles that she's written. She wrote a very good law review article about CRS and others as well. So I think that makes a difference when people have advocated on behalf of the agency.
Interesting. I, of course, was aware of the book, wasn't aware of the articles, but I hadn't thought about, I'm so focused on research that I was thinking much more about how useful the book is for research and wasn't thinking about it for publicity and fundraising. But yeah, that's obvious.
You've got to tell the story, right? And somehow, and for people to get it. I think in writing the book, I was just hoping to do right by these people who've been doing such amazing work. I was trying to tell the story of Azika Jennings and of Silke Hansen and all these wonderful folks who have worked at CRS over time here. And I think by putting it down and by capturing it, any legislator can read it and say, oh wow, they did make a huge difference in the Alien Gonzalez situation. They did make a difference in Skokie or in Ferguson, in all these different places here. And I think that is important. It's yes, for a research purpose and for a recognition of those who actually serve, and also I think to make sure those who are open to persuasion or those who may be skeptical and say, yeah, here's what the agency has accomplished, and wouldn't we want more of that? Wouldn't we want this to be more funded at a higher level in order to be successful? And that's my understanding, by the way, is it's looking good for the next year, that there's going to be a very significant increase for CRS in the coming year as well. So I knock on wood on that one.
Yeah, right. Well, the need is certainly there.
Yeah.
Nobody has managed to notice that. Okay, so I'm just going through these questions. My sense is we've pretty much covered them, but I'm gonna read them and see if you have anything to add.
Yeah.
One is, how closely did you work with regional directors or individual conciliators, and what was the nature of your work with them?
You want to be respectful. I wanted to be respectful of the chain of command, right? I had a deputy director who was in charge of the field, who then had a regional director, and then you had the conciliators. It's still a relatively flat organization. I really valued talking with them, hearing about their experiences, engaging them, trying to ask good questions. I enjoyed being in the field when I could. Sometimes it was on a high profile situation, but sometimes it was just the visit, right? Sometimes it was just that's a great time to do it, right? Not under stress here. So I think it was incredibly important to get a sense of what was happening in their offices. I think it was important for me to listen versus be in my desk in Washington, D.C.
Right.
and not really listening directly to them. And yet, of course, I had to rely on my staff quite a bit and read reports to understand what they were doing. But when so I enjoyed when we had the opportunity to talk about cases. I enjoyed the opportunity to sometimes do work with them on an occasional basis, sometimes in the high profile cases, sometimes not, sometimes just because I do remember one occasion working with Charles Phillips and having the opportunity to work on a situation which involved a police chief and a civil rights leader, where there had been some sort of allegation of abuse of a prisoner, and how they would change policies and how they would deal with that. And it was really insightful to help the parties and actually mediate between the two individuals, and to help them listen to each other and help them deal with some of the ego issues involved that are often involved in these situations, especially by people who've known each other for a bit of time, and
Right.
who by definition of their roles and with the context of the community they lived in, often are at odds with each other, at least publicly. And that takes a toll on people. I think that it's not easy, I think, to be in those jobs, and to see how both of these individuals cared a great deal, and both of these individuals wanted to do the right thing, and that a third party can make a difference, in those, when it's in that situations, right? It's a little different from the rest, some of the situations I talked about. It was a little quieter. And here was one where there's a dynamic where there's something blocking the two of them, that there's some anger because one person felt the other blindsided them in a press conference, right? Right. So it's dealing with an ego issue. It's dealing with a personal conflict with what the person did, and then that can snowball in a negative way. And a mediator can go into that kind of situation and help people find the bridge between them, to help them recover and help them get back to a place where they can have, not that they'll be friends. I don't think they were going to be friends, but how could they work in each other that was constructive versus letting that conflict drag them down.
Yeah. I'm going to pause one more minute and be right back. This time it's a Kleenex break. All right. So the next question, again, we've touched on, maybe we can do a little bit more. What sort of reporting was required of conciliators? And did you or other people read through all the reports that were submitted? And do those all then get compiled into the annual report? Or does somebody condense it all and then it gets summarized in the annual report?
Yeah, certainly. I think, that's great. I think that's a good question. I mean, you asked them to do so much, and I think it's absolutely important that folks, that they are then utilized to capture it. Yes, we absolutely required documentation. We certainly had folks in the DC office read it. I didn't read all of it, but I tried to read a sampling of it for sure. I was certainly especially focused on the annual report, and I have read every annual report of CRS. I'm not sure if I'm the only person who's done that, but for the book, I did. And I feel like incredibly fortunate that we have annual reports from every year, because it captures the history too of the agency.
Annual reports?
Was that?
Are these annual reports thin things, or are they?
These are fairly thin.
Okay.
These are publicly available reports that we're required to provide to the Attorney General, that captures for the public. Here's what we're doing. It is a chance to say, hey, we did good work. CRS deserves more funding. as well. And of course, like in many situations, you could not break confidentiality. So we had
Right.
to make sure to only share what was either publicly available or to clean it so that there weren't identifiable details as to what the city or who the individuals were or anything that was shared in confidence, right? Anything that was shared within the work.
So were you not able to even say what we did in Ferguson was?
We could at a high level because it would be
Okay.
publicly available. What you couldn't share was what was information shared confidentially within
Right.
that work,
Right.
right? So you could share,
Right.
yeah, you could share that. Incredibly important, by the way. I think to do that, sometimes it's seen as, oh, it's not that important because it's just a PR piece or something. But to me, it is a record of saying, putting on paper, putting it available to the public, of saying this is what we did. And to me, it was interesting to see trending and to have read every single one of them, to see what changed over time, what was emphasized over time, how certain issues just came back over and over again, like these shootings. I mean, that was of individuals in communities is something that would, you would just see happen over time. And the good work that was done, we given the George Floyd moment that we had in this country, it's important to recognize, of course, these issues have been going on for a long time, and CRS has been working on them for a long time, often making an impact, on these situations, and bringing and at early on in earlier years saying, hey, this is a major issue we have to deal with. What our use of force policies have to do with this? Capturing, focusing on those issues. So, yeah, it captures some of the amazing work, and of course there are some situations that aren't captured too, right? And it's easy, and in the book, to a certain extent, I focus more, and Bertram Levine, the first author, focused more on the well-known ones, and often sometimes the well-known ones lend themselves to writing because more time and energy and staff and budget were focused on these, and there's more publicly available information on these, on those situations. And it does go to a point of also saying, there's a lot of work that's been done over years that also I think may not have been ever written about, and some of that is lost, I think, if it wasn't captured in the annual report here. But I think, again, that's, I think, the wonderful thing about the Oral History Project is that you captured some of these cases that would not have been captured anywhere else either.
Well, great. So I've got 3 follow-on questions to that. Okay. One of them is, what are the other things besides police shootings where you saw the more it changes, the more it stays the same, that were the same things that we just don't seem to be getting over?
Yeah, well, I'd certainly start with some of the hate crimes or hate incidents, right? We have certainly seen an uptick of anti-Semitic incidents. We certainly, with the synagogue in Pittsburgh being a prime example. We have certainly seen an uptick, significant uptick in anti-Asian violence over these last 3 years here, which has an Asian American really troubling and really difficult. And so that's an example of something where you feel like it keeps coming back, and we can see what happened at Charlottesville as being an echo of what happened in Skokie many years ago, and the rise of white nationalism in this country. So those are, I think, hard at times to grapple with. I think part of it is we're still struggling as a country and a society as a whole with the changes in demographics that we're having and the changes in our politics and the conflicts that are as old as this country in terms of what we're doing. And yeah, and that's what I would say comes first to mind. How we deal with those sort of issues. How do we, and you know, what I think has changed in some of that, even though the incidents, there may have increased in number over these recent years in ways that are really unfortunate. And I'm concerned about violence going forward, in election violence here going forward, and as our democracy, how we think about our democracy is being challenged. What some positive signs is you may not be able to control some of that, and I think reporting it makes a difference. The penalties make a difference. How we as a culture see them can make a difference. And I think that one positive sign is when our leaders, our civic organizations also take a stand when it does happen, when there is a sense of allyship, that the community being attacked, you know, whether it's the Asian American community or the Jewish community or the LGBTQ community, that other groups and civic organizations and government organizations are saying, no, this is not something that we want here. And I think CRS has played a key role in some of this. And certainly I would go to post 9/11, during the George Bush administration, CRS did take a lead role in hate crime prevention against individuals who were South Asian, Muslim, and Sikh, and worked hard in working with leaders both locally and nationally on how to help law enforcement and how to help communities better understand people who were being targeted post 9/11. And CRS worked very closely with Muslim and Sikh organizations on how to prevent violence, how to deal with those issues that I think has served the agency well ever since that time. And I think I'm not sure if we had, but we talked about Oak Creek, which was the Sikh temple. It was actually happened, early on, but I think the good work throughout the years also allowed CRS to be ready to deal with incidents of that nature, and to work well with those communities, because of the long relationships and the collaboration with Sikh and Muslim and South Asian civil rights organizations.
Okay. So let's go back to the statement that you made earlier about the annual reports and reading them all. And you said some things stayed the same, but then you also said you could see some things changing. Mm-hmm. So the next question is, what has changed?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot has changed. I mean, the CRS in its early days, under Roger Wilkins and then and later on, did a lot of work on media issues. And there were very, very few minorities in media, and it was seen as something that was extraordinarily important, because whether you see yourself as your communities represented in journalism and broadcast media and print media, there's been a huge shift of more women, more minorities in the media. And CRS did a lot of work early on working with the networks, working with print journalists. So that would be one sign, I think, that there has been tremendous. Now there's still more work to be done, of course, in terms of what the coverage is, and what the perspective is and we are struggling with information and misinformation in ways we didn't struggle with then, even maybe,
Right.
and the polarization within the media and what's seen as a credible source. So there's a lot to be done, but in terms of representation, I think there's been a sea change in terms of that. That's one thing that I think has changed significantly. If what else would I would say has changed? I think how we think about empowerment or working on these issues has changed. At its beginning, most of the conciliators were white. I mean, of CRS, and most were male. There were very few women early on. There were very few minorities early on. That's changed entirely. I mean, for CRS was, in my time, extraordinarily diverse, with a significant number of Black, of Latino, Asian American. We had folks who were Muslim and Sikh as well. The number of women increased dramatically. So I think how we think about who should be doing the work has actually changed dramatically as well. At headquarters, I think it's a majority women now, or super majority women now. That has changed, when early on it has been all men who were at the headquarters office too. And that has changed. That has changed for the good. To have, especially if when you're working with different communities, it is imperative that those delivering the services should also, I think, reflect those communities as well. And that's something that we certainly talked about a lot. I don't know if this is going off topic a bit. It's a different kind of experience, right? But your credibility with different communities shows. If you show up in a community of Native Americans, and if you don't understand the culture, or if you do a faux pas, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly in these situations. So you don't have to be, I don't think, my personal opinion, you don't have to have every team reflect the community you're working in, but it is important that the team have cultural competency or cultural professionalism there, and I think it shows, and that's a skill set. I mean, it's a lot of, the term we use a lot today is code switching, but CRS conciliators are working with a lot of different communities, a lot of different stakeholders. So it is being comfortable with the communities in need, is being comfortable with the power structure, whoever's in that power structure, as well. It's being comfortable with business leaders. It is being comfortable with Black Lives Matter groups, or it is, and not. That's something that requires experience, maturity, and a willingness to challenge yourself too. To constantly be aware of what your own biases are, or constantly being aware of where you need to learn more and where you need to develop as well. And as people get older, your ability to engage with folks who are younger, I think gets challenged too, right? So it could happen in so many different ways, and I'm glad I have a chance to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a key skill set that I'm not sure everyone always talks about with CRS, or any mediator or conciliator who works with people from a variety of backgrounds and experiences in what they do.
So that a little bit relates to the other question that I had, going again back to the reporting. All of these reports that the conciliators, I assume, and I think Diane told me this, and maybe Thomas Battles too, that you did what I would call, I don't know what you called it, an after action report. So after every engagement, you write a little summary of what you did and
Mm-hmm.
what went well and what didn't go so well and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets turned into the regional director,
Mm-hmm.
and presumably it either all goes to Washington or the regional director consolidates it and some of it goes to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Is all that stuff have any utility? I mean, it clearly has utility, but was it used for trainings or any sort of research or data analysis independent of the annual report?
Yes, I would say we would certainly use them to understand who we were working with fundamentally, right? What communities we were working with, what types of folks, whether we were working with, were we working with the Rotary Club in that community? Were we working with the police department? Were we working with youth groups? So having, and then we would also use it for what service that we provide there. I mean, that's important to know. Like, what do we do? Lots of different things. Did we do a spirit? You know, this program that we have, that's basically a brainstorming tool that's used within the schools or within the city as a problem solving tool there. So that we would also use the reports for as well. And certainly I think for the regional director, who then has to provide a performance review for their conciliators, that's what they would look at to say, okay, here's the number of cases you did, here are the outcomes, you know, here's where your successes were, here's what we need to do for that. And then you do it for within that that office, that regional office, like then it would roll up to that. It's like, okay, here's what all the conciliators did within this office. How does that look? How many education clients that are, you know, cases that we worked that year? How many community-based cases? That would give you a sense of, I think that would also be used for that purpose, for the portfolio of what type of cases were we actually doing as well within a community. I'm sure it could be utilized better, and I know depending upon the administration, how they're used could change. I know other directors who they spent a lot of time going through individual cases on a weekly basis, or they had, you know, an associate director do that as well. And I can see some of the benefit there. I know Gil Pampas, he as a director who was, I think one of the very few who was a conciliator before becoming a CRS director, really emphasized the ability to think through and audit the cases and really get a sense of doing that for example, as well. So yeah, I think they're important to utilize. If you're asking people to do it, you really do have to utilize it, or else it is purely paperwork that doesn't contribute to the organization's success.
Yes, although I think it's helpful. When I was mediating cases, I found it helpful to write things down afterwards.
Oh yeah.
To learn from it myself and then go back to later and say, oh yeah, that didn't work so well that time. I've learned from that. We won't do that again.
Yeah.
So,
no question. I mean, yeah, the best after action reports are ones where you can do real learning, right?
Yeah.
There's a real loop of, and I've done that for myself throughout my career. Not for turning it in, but I journaled it. I would say, here's what I would have a team do it. Like, let's together talk about what worked well, what we would do differently.
right.
It's not that hard a conversation. And I think that was an important, it's very powerful. I mean, in so many situations, if you can have that honest, reflective conversation with yourself and then within the team, then you can continue to learn. I don't hesitate to say, that's true for CRS work. It's true for life, right? Can we continue to be learning individuals? It's easy not to learn. The older you get, the easier I think it is not to learn, because you can rely on the way you've been doing things. And but yeah, I learned that early on. I mean, to the extent that you can do that assessment with, and put your ego aside, right? I think that's the hard part, to not be defensive about what what you just did, and then to be able to do that. Yeah, so I agree, and to the extent that they did that, I think that benefited them. And I think for sure the regional directors who were more learning focused, that would happen. And that was certainly the goal when we tweaked the systems, right? Is how does this actually help give you the opportunity to improve, right? Continuous improvement. You can go to Deming's ideas on that in terms of quality, but I think however you did it, and whenever we tweaked the systems, I was trying to encourage that as much as we could, and you can certainly see for the conciliators who would get better over time, it's because they had that mindset on an individual basis, and certainly for the regions who did that the best, you could see how the offices improved as well.
Huh. Okay. How closely did you work with the rest of DOJ? You talked about walking this fine line between assessment and investigation. I guess it was Diane actually who was talking more about that.
Yeah.
But there's the problem of people expecting CRS to investigate or to prosecute, and you don't. But did you collaborate at all with Civil Rights Division or other parts of justice?
Sure, and it could have been for there might have been roles, for example, when we were working on hate crimes reporting after the Oak Creek situation, where we were trying to adjust hate crimes reporting, where police report where for what reason an incident took place, and after the shooting in Oak Creek, there was an outcry for improving the system by adding the C category, so that we would know, like, why did this, who was the perpetrator, and what was the hate motivation there. So we would then work with the Civil Rights Division, FBI, the different offices within the Department of Justice, to move that forward, to facilitate conversation, to doing so, because per the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, our job was to prevent and to respond to these situations. So there are always a lot of meetings in the Department of Justice, and communication is incredibly important, right? The more that I and others were able to share about what CRS is doing to other agencies, the more that they could understand what we're doing and introduce us, if it was appropriate, to situations. At the same time, the point that you shared is absolutely true. We had to maintain confidentiality of our work. We could not share what we learned, and anything that we found out could not be used for prosecution or for litigation or for investigation. So we would be very careful about that. I would actually tell people that often the beginning of meetings or at the end of meetings, or say, here's what I cannot share in that regard. But there are so many things happening, for example, in the prevention of hate crimes, where we would participate in White House meetings on it. We would meet with the civil rights groups. We would meet with police chiefs. I was a member of the Human and Civil Rights Committee of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So I would on a regular basis meet with them, be on panels with them, talk about ways, policies, and how we could work more closely with each other. Certainly met a lot with civil rights groups as well. Work closely with the Civil Rights Division and the COPS office and the Office of Justice Programs, many different acronyms that would exist with the Department of Justice to help on the issues that matter. How do we help increase the resolution of community conflicts, right? The Department of Justice is a very powerful organization, and the more we can inform them about CRS, the more we can say, here's what we're working on and how can we create more positive community outcomes. How can we engage community in different situations? I think made a difference. There were often in the high profile situations, there would be meetings of all the different Department of Justice entities that were involved. So that way we wouldn't, because if you went into a community and say you're Department of Justice, there could be 4 or 5 agencies from Department of Justice in the community. So the more coordinated we were, the better.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't step on each other's foot. We wouldn't do all that. When there was an incident and we say the Boston Marathon shooting, where there's fear about backlash violence, there'd be a call organized, which would include FBI, U.S. Attorney, Civil Rights Division, CRS, where we were collaborating to help the communities. Like, how do you, if it could be like, if there's concern about attacks on houses of worship. So you would give advice to people how to work with your local police department if there's concerns about it. How can you keep your house of worship safe? To have a liaison, to have a plan, a security plan. How to make sure you have video. You can have video cameras and all these sort of things. So, and we were very small. CRS is a very small agency, so the ability to amplify the message, the goals of responding and preventing hate crimes, the goals of helping people resolve their own conflicts or helping communities solve their own conflicts, it was important to partner, to use the platform, to use that time. I know people from community mediation centers talk about how the creation of CRS in 1964 Civil Rights Act is the first federal recognition of community conflict resolution. And it stands for that proposition. Lyndon Baines Johnson advocates for it and believed in the importance, and I believe fully in it as well. People need to be involved in the resolution of their own conflicts. Community members need to be involved in and not have it imposed upon them, right? America has a very arguably has an excellent legal system. You could challenge that idea, but it's meant to handle things at scale, and it's meant to handle things at volume. It can leave out the voices of the individuals themselves at time, because the court system bureaucracy, it starts to manifest where the lawyers have to be talking to each other, and you have all these filings and regulations and civil procedure. The benefit of community conflict resolution, the benefit of CRS, is the idea that there's a third party, but the resolution of that conflict, of that disagreement, of that discord is still based upon the idea of sometimes marginalized communities who maybe they don't speak, maybe they're newcomers to this country, maybe they're afraid for their lives, and maybe they're concerned about going to law enforcement. Your job is the CRS job, and I think community conflict resolution as a whole is to help provide that voice, or help them be prepared to come to the table so that they can advocate for themselves. I think that's a really unique thing, and that's not what most of the Department of Justice is about. and I think that voice is important. There is an Office of Dispute Resolution that was created during Janet Reno's time. That was also partner. I would often talk to the head of that, and we would often do events, and we would often try to amplify that message about the importance of how to help individuals and communities resolve their differences, utilizing their own abilities, their own communication, their own gifts.
Did you also do the same sort of thing with other federal agencies? Like I can think of Homeland Security or education or transportation conceivably.
Yeah, as much as we could, it could be it could happen for a number of reasons, because if there is some sort of problem within some community where FEMA, what was there, and there was a way to partner with them, like during Hurricane Katrina, where we sent a significant number of CRS conciliators there, and working closely with FEMA on and marginalized communities not being able to get access, and working with those communities to work closely with FEMA. So it could be the SBA. When Silke Hansen was working after what happened with Rodney King and the police, that incident, and the Korean American community was in turmoil because of what was going on in their communities, and the attacks on their stores, and the destruction and looting that happened. Where how do we help folks get SBA small business loans, and connecting people to resources? So a lot of it, and at the regional, that's the benefit. I don't know if I talked enough about this earlier, of having offices. It's not just at DC, though it's good to have that connection. And I had worked at the SBA, which I think helped, in partnering, for example, with the Small Business Administration. But it helps to have a CRS person within each of the 10 regions, who then knows the regional offices for all those different, for FEMA, for SBA, for all of that. DHS was a little bit different because there was concerns. What was Department of Homeland Security doing? They were often trying to root out terrorism, and so we had to take more care in interacting with them, because their stance, or some of the suspicion of DHS, was they were trying to partner because they were trying to find out who they were. So you have to be a little careful at times, I think, in situations like that here. But if you use the model of CRS as a social worker, and you're there to provide support, a lot of it is trying to connect a community to resources. So the better networked and connected a conciliator and a regional director are, the more quickly and the more efficiently and the more knowledgeably you can connect them to the resources they need, or collaborate in a certain way with them. We would certainly speak together to communities, minority communities, about these issues. I think it helped a lot that as an appointee, right, as a political appointee, I think it's important to recognize I had a network of political appointees. So, Roger Wilkins talks about that when his ability to get things done, because he knew all the other African American political appointees, which there were not that many during the LBJ, but they were part of his network to get things done here. And it was true for me. The fact that I knew many appointees for different reasons, including being Asian American appointees, that would help. There were some as well. But having, I think what's important is having a high degree of trust with the people you work with, having the creating working relationships of high integrity matter, because you want it to be known as a person of trust and high integrity. And the way you do that is by acting that way, by acting with integrity and acting with trust. And so I think that was important for everyone, from every conciliator, regional director, and including me as a director. But yes, I think the ability to make an impact is, especially when you're a small agency as CRS, is the ability to partner with other federal agencies effectively, quickly, and so that, right, oftentimes can you get what you're dealing with communities that are often in duress. So the more quickly you can provide some solutions or resources, the better.
Did you ever have conflicts between different agencies? The one that I immediately thought of when you were talking about DHS was Customs and Border Control and ICE. I would think that you could have real problems there.
Sure, and I think you would have tensions, you would have differences with individuals or with agencies. I think it's what would I say in those situations? And you would, I think it's important that you had to maintain your relationships with the stakeholders in that given community. And you're always walking a fine line anyway, right? Because you're interacting with groups that are often at odds with each other. Maybe it's customs and border, maybe it's Customs and Border Patrol. Maybe there's a U.S. Attorney's Office who's investigating in that community. Being perceived and acting as an honest broker, I think, makes a difference, because this was true in a number of the cases that I was involved in, certainly a number of the cases in the book, where you want to be known, you want to be able to move and be able to talk to all the different parties. You don't want someone not talking to you. If you're there as a facilitator, if you are there as a convener, if you're there as a person to try to maintain channels of communication, right? That's what you're often there for. I certainly remember cases where protesters in a certain agency they weren't talking to, a law enforcement agency wasn't talking to each other, and if they're protesting and they're not talking to each other, bad things can happen. And I can think of a situation in a large city where there was going to be some arrests being made, or there were, and by clearly communicating to parties, you could help prevent any violence from happening just by making sure messages were not being lost in those situations. So so I think even in those situations where you're talking about federal agencies and being careful, you still want to be you're there to be the communications hub often. And I think you can often smooth over conflicts between some of the agencies, or or the individuals within those agencies, to be more accurate here. So I think that's a role that CRS conciliators can and should play. I mean, that's their assets are their credibility, the trust, and the person who can hopefully see the bigger picture here as well. And your job is how do you help people? How do you help communities achieve success? How do you help them stay safe? How do you help them, deal with the problem of potential violence in a situation, or they're not getting a resource that they need in order for the lights to be turned on if it's a hurricane, or to get water, or whatever it might be.
I'm going to go far afield because something you said just made me think of this, and I'm curious. What does CRS do in instances where one party isn't interested in preventing violence? They want to ferment it.
I'm trying to think, you certainly would work with the groups that don't want violence to not be drawn in and pulled in to the violence. I can think of situations where, say there's a protest group, and then there's some sort of group that's there just to do that, to foment violence. You've got to make sure to tell the protesters and the folks are there who are there for a positive, constructive purpose, that if you see these people, or here's what to do. Like, for example, there will, if they identify the group that is there to just cause trouble and violence, they'll often do it by jumping into a totally legitimate, constructive protest group and try to start a fight there. They're taught, one thing that I remember, I think Thomas Battle said, is that the training technique is for everyone in that group to go to the outside. Just leave the people who are just trying to foment the violence by themselves, so that you're not caught up in it, right? Or seek out support. Find somebody who can deal with that issue, whoever that group might be, the marshals or whoever, to deal with that group that's trying to foment it, or making sure your group, that's what self-marshaling does. You have people who are identified as being there to keep and that way your group, as you're walking down a street, and I've walked down the street with some of these groups when they were self-marshaling, that you stay together and you don't get mixed up with groups that are there to cause violence. Right. And that you have actions to take, protocols to take, if you see a group that's there to create violence there as well. It's making sure that law enforcement is aware of it. Law enforcement, I remember, like at national conventions, they would have if there were groups, they're trained, like a bunch of officers and bikes. If there's a group that's there to cause trouble, to just bike in between the two groups to keep the groups apart. So that way, if you do something, you're in trouble, but the group that is not trying to do anything is safe from this other group. So these are skills and expertise that the conciliators and regional directors have gained over time on dealing with it. That isn't to say you could still, there are times when working with some of these groups that foment violence, that you can talk to them and say, what are you here to do? And can you get them to back down? Can you get them to say, I don't think you want to do this. Would you agree to leave this spot? And here's why you should do so, right? That's happened. I have certainly spoken to conciliators like Ron Wakabayashi and others who have said they'll go to one of these groups with they often have to talk to whatever law enforcement agency is making sure that it's okay for them to do it. There's protocols that you have to follow, and then because their goal is to keep people safe, to not have things to prevent violence, right? Here, so I think there are ways where you can engage some of those groups. I'm not saying it's going to be successful 100% of the time, but I think it's still good to have that. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything more that we haven't touched on media? The question is, how did you deal with media? It seems to me like we've kind of run that one into the ground.
I'm not sure. Well, Heidi, I could talk on this for a long time. Yeah. But I'm happy I don't know. Did we talk? I don't think we talked about in Sanford, when social media started to make accusations, Breitbart made accusations that CRS was fomenting violence, and there were conservative groups doing that, and which led to Fox hosts like Sean Hannity and Bill Riley and Laura Ingraham and Rush Limbaugh making accusations that CRS was causing the violence, was egging them on. I don't think we talked about that.
I think Thomas probably did, because it sounds really familiar, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a newer phenomenon, right? That wasn't around the first time you did the interviews.
Indeed.
And so you had Breitbart stating that CRS are sending secret agents to foment these protests at Sanford. It happened in other places, but I'm going to stick with Sanford for the moment here, and made accusations and had conspiracy theories that Eric Holder was the person doing this often. Eric Holder was the villain often in this one, and I was his lackey here. It was a way of attacking President Obama as the first Black president. It was a way Eric Holder became the nice stand-in. He was the head of the Department of Justice. And here's this agency that's not that well known that you can then make an accusation about. And so there were on Breitbart, on other extremist, I want to say this, it's important. Websites, they would make these accusations, and that was something that was new in dealing with that, and it was very demoralizing, right? To see yourselves portrayed this way. I had no experience of Hannity and right. And this is all happening. A lot of it. So it was happening. So it, how it often works is that you have whatever goes on in the internet, and there are people making accusations. Extremist sites are making accusations, and then at some point, Fox hosts and Rush Limbaugh pick up. They read it. Their editors pick up on it and say, "Oh, let's run with this here." And that's what happened. This happened during there had been the jury was out on George Zimmerman. And so there was a lull. So they started pushing this story out there. And it was demoralizing. And what, in talking with DOJ officials, we agreed, we're not going to respond. There's nothing here. What I told staff is just keep doing the work. Let that go. Now we did have to respond, and I did have to share, like, here's the truth here in the matter here. Luckily for us, it didn't go beyond Fox News and some of the right-wing media hosts, talk show hosts like Limbaugh, because once other media looked into it, they realized there was nothing there. You talk to police chiefs and they say, no, we love having CRS there. They help in these situations. They're not fomenting things. So you then had some pushback from other media as well. So I think Rachel Maddow did a show on it, and you would have different newspaper reports saying, no, CRS is doing good work there as well. But there was a moment where you're certainly concerned, is this going to become even a bigger story here, and that's something new. And for CRS, it had never been pointed out that way. I think its reputation allowed it to withstand it, and in that situation, another example, and I think Thomas was involved in this one. As well. I mean, Thomas was actually he was at the center of some of the stuff that was going on in Sanford as well. Is they would videotape when CRS was at like the national conventions and doing some of the work I talked about earlier, and making accusations of the same type, right? That in that regard. And as long as we would just explain internally to the Department of Justice, here's what's actually happening. We would just let it. We would therefore then just let it go for the most. I mean, let it go by saying we didn't respond to it. We wouldn't go out. We wouldn't have a press conference. We wouldn't do things like that. If asked by a journalist, we would say, here's what actually happened. Here's the truth of it, and as well. So that is something that is new. That I think. CRS folks need to be very careful about, but if you do your work well, if you do it right, I don't think there's any reason to worry. It's just that that's just the atmosphere, and that's just a possibility of what could happen.
Right. Mm-hmm. There's another angle on that. When I was asking the media question, I was thinking of traditional media and wasn't thinking about social media, but social media is such a volatile situation, and it's all new because it didn't exist when we did the interviews 25 years ago. And we had a question that we asked way back then about how did you control rumors? And the problem of rumor control in the day and age of social media and everybody taking pictures of all sorts of things with their smartphone has to be way more challenging. And it was challenging back in the day, and now with the amount of false stuff that's going around, it's got to be out of control.
It's a harder environment to work in. And if you have to be more alert to the fact that any session you're doing, someone could be recording. You have to be alert that anyone who attends a session that you have might go on social media afterward and say, here's what happened. And that has occurred, but you certainly you have to talk up front with people in a meeting, people in a session that you're conducting. We ask that here are the ground rules, right? We ask that you not discuss this as confidential. We ask that you not go social media, and you might even have to think through, if it does happen, what is your response, right? And or what are the consequences for the group or for this for this case of how you approach it here. So there is so much more to be cognizant about. For sure. I think what has served CRS well is the fact that it has a long history of success and a very positive reputation with protest groups, civil rights groups, community groups, neighborhood groups, and also with law enforcement and business leaders and political leaders, that so many have seen the benefit in their communities here. And I found that to be true in talking to congressional members who know when CRS has been there at large rallies or large events that were possibly, violence was a concern, where CRS played an important role in keeping it safe. And so that kind of support has always been important for people, stakeholders here. But as we know, as things get more polarized, it gets harder, not easier.
Yeah, I'm sure. So one of our questions is, coming up soon, is how has political polarization affected the work of CRS?
I think the last thing I just mentioned is a part of it, right? If there's an attempt to politicize CRS's work and label it as partisan when in fact it is not. And I think that makes it more difficult, because then it's seen as, then it's seen as an advocacy organization or a one-sided group. I think that's, at least from a CRS perspective, I think it makes it hard. And I can also see in all sorts of disputes, if the disputes take on more of a political overtone, makes it harder to come to resolution. You're getting further away from the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You're getting further from political polarization leads to the win being showing up the libs, or making fun of the conservatives. That's not a goal that CRS is there for, right? CRS is there to help create an agreement. CRS is there to help create understanding. If something is more politicized, by definition, the goals that each side seeks, I think, are going to be different and more difficult to harmonize here.
And I would expect that is something that CRS conciliators are facing more and more over time. Would you say that's correct? Or
yeah, and CRS the jurisdiction is not to deal with something that's strictly political, right? It has to have a component. It has to, the conflict itself must have to do with an identity-based group, whether it's race, gender, and all these things. So by definition, CRS could not do purely political work. And I would say that if something had overtly political challenges to it, I think CRS would also say, even though it may have a race issue, it's one where CRS's services should not be provided, or it would be too problematic or too difficult to do. So then you bring in all those other issues of ripeness, of practical, practical outcomes here. So yeah, it becomes harder to even decide to go into a situation. I think, especially since you're a federal employee, you don't want to go in. If something is controversial in a certain kind of way, it makes less sense for CRS to be there. Now, if it's one of community conflict, it may be controversial, but it's one where CRS's service makes sense, because it can bring to an agreement on a policy, or it can make an agreement to how to keep people safe. That's good. So yeah, I think you have to it makes the equation more complicated,
right,
for sure.
So we're close to time. I want to bring up two things that related to that before, when you were talking, you talked about, I thought, CRS being at one of the political conventions, which surprised me, because that's not intended to be a racial situation. And then you also talked a bit about, I don't know whether it was potentially becoming involved or actually becoming involved in election violence, which would be, that strike me as political, not.
Oh yeah, so I'm glad you raised that. On the second, I'll start with the second question first. CRS would never be involved in an election issue. Okay. I was just thinking more. I was thinking more of the general trends of society. That there's, I think there's a concern. And by the way, they may have racial elements to it, though. And I'm speaking to the larger issue, larger societal issues, and we need to deal with them, right? As well, for sure. I'm concerned about violence in elections. I'm concerned about these things, and sometimes they do have a racial element to it, right? As well. But I'm not advocating for CRS engagement. That CRS should clearly stay away from any sort of issue on an election issue there. On the first question, at conventions, this was true at Democratic and national conventions, CRS would come and play a role and work with the law enforcement, there. And if there was an issue that had to do with race, or then CRS could be involved, given its expertise at dealing with protests and rallies and helping people, helping calm tensions, helping reduce conflict, overt conflict in a situation. So that's why CRS had done a number of conventions. I'm not sure it's done so recently, but it did when I was a director, and certainly did prior to my becoming director as well. But you could only be engaged as long as it met your jurisdictional requirements here. And we would always make sure, if we did the Democratic convention, we would also do the Republican convention, right? And that was important. And we would go on it. The CRS conciliators would be ready to go, but they were always very careful as to when they would be engaged in a situation or not. And this was dealing often in the streets. So this was purely working in the streets outside of the convention itself. It would be where the protest groups were. That was the space at which CRS would work.
All right. My mind goes back to Chicago, 1968, but I'm guessing CRS probably
was not, as far as I know, it was not at 1968.
Yeah, it was still pretty young then. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have used up another 2 hours.
Okay.
We have lots of questions left. I hope you're willing to come back and do this again.
I enjoy it. It's actually, I find it, it's useful to think about, important to think about. And so I appreciate the thoughtful questions, Heidi.
Well, I'm just enjoying this thoroughly and am delighted that we can continue for another time or two. So as per usual, I'll get in touch about scheduling. Okay. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. Have a great weekend. Hope you and Guy have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye-bye.